Well, hello everybody, welcome. Welcome to our special seminar on how to create better local cycling experiences. And we've got a fantastic panel lineup tonight. I'm really looking forward to this session. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge, as a sign of respect, the traditional owners. I'd like to start tonight's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands, of elders past and present, and other Aboriginal people who may be watching this evening. I'd also like to express my gratitude that we share this land and my sorrow for the cost of that sharing. I hope that in the spirit of reconciliation, we can move towards a place of justice, healing, and partnership. Boy, have we got a great session organised tonight. I have to say I've really been looking forward to this. So in a moment, I'll formally be introducing to you our panellists, Sarah Bickford, Norman Monshall, and Scott Porter. But before I do that, just a quick rundown on how tonight will run. It'll be the usual where we have our three presenters will speak, and then we've allowed plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Now, I know you're all used to Zoom by now, but just in case you're not, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section. And I encourage you, please send through your questions throughout the presentation, because I'm the one who has to go through them all and quickly work out what they are so that we can get plenty of time for our panellists to cover it. And I encourage you to keep them short, please, so that we can get through as many as possible. All right, well, let's start off by formally introducing our first presenter, who's Sarah Bickford. Now, Sarah's going to talk to us tonight from a planning perspective. She's an architect whose interest in bigger picture issues of urban renewal, transport and placemaking has resulted in her embarking on a Masters of Planning at UTS. Sarah works for Bicycle New South Wales, which is a member-based association with a mission to achieve a better environment for all bike riders. I know she's a keen cyclist and she's also a local. So Sarah, over to you. And remember to unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everybody. So in this short presentation, I want to explain why we should encourage cycling on the northern beaches, have a little look at what's happening elsewhere in the world, and then discuss how we can improve things locally to keep all those people who have discovered two wheels during lockdown on their bikes. The last few decades, why is that not? Okay. The last few decades have seen an explosion in vehicle traffic on our roads. The number of vehicles in Australia has quadrupled to 20 million in the last 50 years. Attempts to try and keep all these cars moving has pushed people walking and cycling to the very edges of our streets. Congestion grows, transport emissions keep rising, and public health is suffering due to sedentary lifestyles. You can see the obesity rates in Australian children over the last 50 years in that graph on the bottom right. Footpaths are narrow and feel unsafe, roads are hard to cross, and more people use cars for short local journeys. Fewer kids walk and cycle to school. It's now about 25%, whereas in the 1970s it was 75%. It becomes a vicious circle. School traffic is bad for congestion and road safety, queues of cars around schools make crossings dangerous, and yet more kids are driven. More than 2 million car trips in Sydney each day are less than 2 kilometres. These trips should be easy to walk or cycle. Riding bikes has so many benefits, both for individuals and the wider community. It's fun, above all, and it's healthy. The incidental exercise from travelling actively goes a long way to meeting daily exercise recommendations. Bikes don't take up much room, reducing congestions on the road, and also parking problems at destinations, which is obviously an issue in Manly and DY and down at the beaches and the town centres. They don't create pollution or noise, which have a major impact on urban amenity. Cycling can be a very efficient way to travel, with guaranteed travel times and no need to find parking. Studies show that people walking and cycling spend more in local businesses than those arriving by cars. Bikes are cheap to buy and they're cheap to run. Families driving less could manage with fewer cars, saving thousands every year. More people out on the streets and not in steel boxes increases social interaction, creates vibrancy and a sense of community. Importantly, cycling is a transport mode that is accessible to 30% of the community who don't drive, either because they're too young or too old or they don't own a car. Safe cycling offers independence for children, which is so important for their development. And it also benefits parents who can be freed from taxi duties. In the Netherlands, over a third of trips made by people aged 65 to 75 are by bike. The bicycle is seen as a rolling walking stick, a mobility device that is easier on older joints than walking.
Sarah, just slow down a little bit. Just slow down a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
It's a rolling walking stick. It's a mobility device. It's easier on older joints than walking. We obviously have a few more hills on the northern beaches, but e-bikes have been game-changing for many local residents. So that gentleman there is enjoying cycling on the amazing Dutch bike paths. So here's some global inspiration. Many cities around the world have been making huge efforts to encourage cycling in recent years. Beyond the famous cycling towns of Denmark and Holland, where a third of trips are now by bicycle, amazing changes to urban transport have also happened in Bogota, New York, Seville, Berlin, and many more. In London, there are new cycle superhighways which link the suburbs to the city centre. You can see those on the left, full of people bike riding. In Paris, 650 kilometres of new separated cycleways are being constructed at the moment, and cycling has exploded. In a city where cars used to be crammed into every nook and cranny, the mayor, Anne Hidalgo, was re-elected on a promise to further improve conditions for active transport. Next, she is planning to turn the Périphérique motorway into a tree-lined 50-kilometre-an-hour boulevard and remove 70,000 street parking places to make room for wider pavements and bike lanes. Over in Barcelona, they are creating superblocks, which they're doing by joining 9 of their urban blocks together and allowing any local traffic to access the internal streets. So space that used to be used for parking cars and driving cars is now freed up for public activities and all these public spaces you can see in the pictures. And children cycle to school in large groups on something called a bici bus. All this has been accelerated by the pandemic, when everybody has had an opportunity to walk and cycle more in their neighbourhoods and think about how our space in our streets is shared. Cities have experimented with pop-up infrastructure and traffic calming projects, which make it easier to walk and cycle and reduce pressure on public transport. So back to Sydney. So the City of Sydney has been leading the charge in this, creating more space for people over the last 15 years. They've installed wider pavements and safe cycling infrastructure. The separated bike path on Burke Street was the first major route to be delivered, and it's transformed the atmosphere and amenity of Surrey Hills. Last year, the council worked with Transport for New South Wales to rapidly install 6 pop-up cycleways, which has helped join up the network. The pandemic was a great opportunity to trial new routes without years of consultation and political wrangling. It is now easier than ever to cycle through the CBD of Sydney. It really is worth taking bikes on the ferry with your children and exploring the infrastructure. You can cycle from Circular Quay to Alexandria, over to Centennial Park, and around to the inner west on safe, family-friendly paths. It's a good, fun day out. Recent surveys show that the old adage, build it and they will come, stands true. 18% of Sydney residents regularly cycle their bike now, compared to just 7% in 2017. Of that number, 53% of regular riders have started cycling in the last 2 years. Other parts of Sydney are also rapidly expanding networks of separated paths, both in the road environment and along green corridors and rivers. Learning from the City of Sydney, many on-street bike paths are now fitted into standard 12.8 metre wide streets as shown in this section. This can be done with no loss of parking because parking lanes and driving lanes are narrowed. So that's what's happened on Queen's Road in Westmeath, for example. It's happened in this Todman Road in Kensington project. So the parking can remain. That takes away one of the major community issues when it comes to installing this infrastructure. Construction has been simplified now by using the existing road surface, installing simple concrete dividers, and using the existing stormwater drains and curbs. This allows budget to be concentrated on improving the intersections, because safe intersections really make all this work. So this is the old way of doing things on the northern beaches. So for a long time, councils have tried to install bike lanes by painting lines and logos on the road. Cyclists end up squeezed between parked cars and moving cars and what is known as the door zone. Only fit and fearless cyclists are comfortable in these lanes, and they don't help children or less confident cyclists to start riding. The good news is that Northern Beaches Council no longer considers painted lanes next to parked cars to be adequate, and they are now being phased out locally. Safety is the main barrier to more participation in bike riding. Research shows that 70% of Sydney residents would ride if the infrastructure was there to support them. Provided a connected bike network is essential to encourage more people of all ages and abilities to ride safely. A bike network will include separated cycleways, shared paths, bike lanes and low traffic streets. These all contribute to create a safe, comfortable and convenient journeys. At Bicycle New South Wales, we like to think that a cycle network should be safe enough for an 8-year-old to tackle on his own, between 8 and 80. Short stretches of path that don't connect do not make a useful network to encourage more cycling. In a mature cycling city, the network will resemble a public transport map like these examples from Paris, Bristol and Melbourne. Some of these are still in progress, but that's the intention is there. A principal bike network was designed for Sydney, but delivery has been hindered by a lack of a political will and a continued focus on making driving as easy as possible. However, new Transport for New South Wales policies require much more priority to be given to cycling and walking, so change is in the air, which is quite exciting. So 3 main types of safe infrastructure are shared paths, separated bike paths, and what we call quiet ways. Shared paths are either widened footpaths next to the road or separate paths through parks and green spaces. And here are some images. They are common in the northern beaches and council is rolling out many more. They don't interfere with the road environment or parking, and pedestrians can benefit because you end up with better quality footpaths. However, there's often conflict with walkers. Many of them are very narrow, and during the last 18 months, when so many people have been out walking and cycling, the conflicts and the pinch points have got worse, so flashpoints have popped up. Roadside shared paths, like the one in this picture on a Lambie Road, are often cluttered with bus stops, signs and poles. So they're really uncomfortable for riding on. Side street crossings are still dangerous, particularly for children. And if safe crossings are provided, they're not usually on the desire line. So anybody who wants to get somewhere at a sensible pace is hindered. So generally, So shared paths are most appropriate along major roads, like these ones built along Warringah Road at French's Forest, where there are a few pedestrian side streets or driveways, and through public open space. They need to be at least 3 metres wide, probably 3.4 to 5, really, so people cycling can pass walkers without conflict. However, it's generally much better to leave footpaths for people walking and provide separate spaces for people cycling. So this is separated bike paths. I've already shown lots of examples of fully separated paths in Sydney and around the world. This is a preferred treatment along main roads and is now a focus for the priority cycling network in most Sydney LGAs. The Northern Beaches now has its very own separated path, which is exciting in DY. This was installed as part of the Streets as Shared Spaces trial. Hopefully more are going to come. And now on to quiet ways. 50 to 60% of Sydney's roads are actually residential streets. These are full of destinations for cyclists, i.e. their houses, and they're a crucial part of the cycle network. Residential streets provide the first and last mile of every trip and connect with the separated paths and priority routes. However, installing separate infrastructure in all these streets would take many years and be very, very expensive. So there is now a major push to make local streets safer so they can become quiet ways where cyclists and cars share the road. There are 2 key components to a quiet way. There needs to be less speed and less traffic. This area already has streets where traffic is filtered to slow cars and reduced through traffic, so it's not a new idea. The best examples are Alexandra Street and Pacific Parade in Manly, where it feels perfectly safe for children to cycle in the middle of the road. The calm, low traffic environment has helped these streets become some of the most desirable in the area. So on to the next thing, which is the speed limits. The first major move is to lower speed limits at 30 kilometres an hour. This is becoming global best practice, and there is some logic behind it. So looking at the graphs, at impact speeds above 30 kilometres an hour, the risk of death for a pedestrian increases dramatically. Around 90% of pedestrians will survive a collision at 30 kilometres an hour, but at 50 kilometres an hour, only 20% will. Slower speeds also give drivers more time to stop and a wider view of what is going on in the street. The second graph shows how journey times do not decrease much in urban areas after 30 kilometres an hour. To drive 3.5 kilometres, say from St Cecilia's School down to Manly Beach along Lauderdale Avenue, takes about 8 minutes. If the speed limit was 30 kilometres an hour, it would take 10 minutes, so not much more. It's rarely possible to drive at the speed limit anyway due to other cars, lights and intersections. Add the graphs together and you see that 30 kilometres an hour is a bit of a sweet spot, allowing people to reach destinations in a reasonable time while making the streets feel safe enough to walk and cycle on. It's then not necessary to build expensive separated bike lanes, as cyclists can be comfortable sharing the road. Here in Australia, neighbourhoods usually have 50 kilometre an hour speed limits with few safe crossings and sometimes no footpaths. 40 kilometre an hour school zones have saved lives and made things safer, but they don't cover the whole walk home. And signs invite drivers to revert to safe, unsafe speeds just metres past the school gate. The whole journey needs to be made safe. Reducing speed limits to 30 would increase the likelihood that children are allowed to walk and cycle around their neighbourhoods, reducing congestion around the school run, which causes way more delays than the lower speed limit would. The 30 please movement, which is known as 20's plenty, in the UK and the US, where 20 miles an hour is about the same as 30 kilometres an hour. They advocate for area-wide speed limits, and this will help create a social norm to drive slowly. It's a fast and low-cost intervention and is shown to be very effective in supporting active travel. It creates a virtuous circle. Safer cycling attracts new riders, cycling becomes more visible, drivers are more likely to cycle too, cars are more aware, then there is less driving because people want to cycle, it feels safe, and then more people ride and walk. Speed reductions over a wide area have been shown to bring more benefits than individual safety improvements in isolated locations. The movement is gaining ground both in Australia and overseas. Almost all roads in Spain have had a 30-kilometre-an-hour limit since May. Paris introduced a blanket 30-kilometre-an-hour limit in August. And in the UK, 20 million people live in streets with a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. The UN has now endorsed this limit, and its Streets for Life message will be the key focus of road safety campaigns in every country for the next decade. Children's safety is the most important message. Everybody wants their kids to be able to walk and cycle to school. An added benefit is less pollution, with about 25% less carbon dioxide than at 50 kilometres an hour, and about 40% less noise. 30-kilometre-an-hour limits would enable a true cycle network to be delivered very economically. Shared and separated paths are very expensive and progress is slow in most councils. So Manly has led the way because we trialled a small 30-kilometre-an-hour zone in the centre. There are plans to roll out more, and this will be a game changer for safety in our residential suburbs like Bagala Heights, North Bagala, where there is so much concern about speeding. Not everybody will comply with the speed limits, but research shows that normalising a lower limit does lead to slower driving overall. So that's an introduction. So of course, some changes to the street environment is needed too. But once the overall speed limit has been applied, that can be done in key locations where issues still arise. Our streets have been designed to prioritise vehicle flow and speed for over 60 years. So there are wide lanes, there are sweeping corners where cars turn very fast into side streets, and I say not often no footpaths, etc. Small interventions can make a big difference. It is also important to reduce vehicle numbers by discouraging through traffic and rat running. A range of measures can be incorporated, such as single-lane gateways and slow spots where vehicles have to give way to oncoming traffic and bikes, narrowing street widths by introducing landscaping, building raised platforms, traffic islands or medians, creating new pedestrian crossings, and restricting access at one end of the street or reducing it, simplifying flow to one way only. All these things will help reduce rat running, make the street less attractive to through traffic, and make things much quieter and calmer. Education of all road users is also important, and there's lots of initiatives around the place to include more education in driver education and licence renewal programmes. So there are some interesting projects going on in other parts of Australia. Over in Western Australia, we've got the Safe Active Streets. Now these are local streets with few cars travelling at low speeds. They are now an important part of Perth's active transport network. When entering a safe active street, blue and white signs on the road, we've got 30-kilometre-an-hour speed limits and raised intersections to help slow traffic and alert drivers that they're in a bicycle and pedestrian friendly space. It's now in its 6th year and gaining traction within the community. The programme is a key strategy to provide safe walking and cycling routes through the suburbs to local amenities, including schools, parks and shops. Safe Routes to School is another one. It's a grassroots campaign based in Wollongong with several local chapters across the country. Groups of residents get together and work to create safer streets within 2 kilometres of schools. They have fine-tuned their ask to 3 simple things within those 2 kilometres of schools. They're looking for crossings and footpaths on roads where the speed limit is at 40 kilometres an hour and higher, and on other roads where there are no crossings or footpaths or they're quieter residential streets to get the speed limit down to 30 kilometres an hour. And there's chapters around the country and websites and information and links on this page. Finally, I just want to introduce you to the Northern Beaches Bike Plan. This was adopted in July 2020 after community consultation. And it's pretty good, actually. There's a series of directions and actions to help create a safe cycling network, both for transport and recreation. The council is making good progress now on completing some missing links, and you've probably seen new paths in your area. A road cycling network is also identified with the aim of improving safety on the main roads for fitness cycling. There is a recognition that there's lots of different types of cyclists and lots of different requirements. you know, those separated lanes don't suit road racers, but they do suit children. So we need to allow for a lot of different things. Interestingly, the data shows that 40% of Northern Beaches residents ride a bike every year, and that compares to just 25% across the whole of Greater Sydney. However, only a quarter of those residents use their bike for transport. So there's still lots of work to be done in the area. So that's the end.
Fantastic. So interesting. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think the main message I got out of that was that safety is the main barrier. And I don't think we'll get any arguments on that. The other thing that I forgot to mention, guys, at the start of the webinar is obviously we're not discussing mountain biking tonight, though I think Scott's got a couple of points on that later on. That's a whole new area. And of course, trails and things like that for mountain bikers is another important issue. So that was the urban planning perspective, some great local and international examples and some really good ideas of what's happening in our area and what else we can do as well. And thank you for your questions that are coming through. Now I'd like to introduce Norman Monshall. Now, Norman's going to talk to us tonight from the Advocates perspective. And Norman has significant community representation advocacy in the areas of sustainable transport and cycling. And when I read you what he's done, you'll understand why he's doing the Advocates perspective. He's been a member of Bicycle New South Wales for 31 years, and he's cycled in 23 countries. He was the chair of the Manly Council Bike Committee from 1999 to 2009, community representative of Manly Council Sustainable Transport Committee from 2009 to 2011, Bicycle New South Wales representative for the Warringah Council Local Traffic Committee 2011 to 2016, and the Warringah Council representative North Shore Pedestrian and Cycle Committee for the same period of time. So Norman, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say from the Advocates perspective.
Thank you, Candy, and good evening. I want to explore three themes tonight. A brief overview of what's changed in the Northern Beaches, the cycling over the last 20 odd years, how we can all become advocates for further improvements, and then two specific key contemporary issues affecting cycling. There's been amazing changes really in the last 20 years. When I was first chair of the bike committee, essentially there were disconnected paths scattered around the Northern Beaches and little else. But now, for example, you can cycle from Shelley Beach to the Warriewood wetlands and back, of course, and that's a 50k round trip. And there's only two hills, and all but the section between Curl and DY is completely off-road. Now, it's surprising how few people realise this can be done in a hilly LGA like ours, but it's mostly flat as well. So that's one example. The hospital has allowed council to leverage a whole series of new bike facilities, two new shared bridges and a whole series of paths and Allambie Road and French's Forest, Warringah Road, and they connect to other cycling areas. Of course, the Narrabeen Lagoon multi-user path has been a huge success. And that took some 30 years of advocacy from all sorts of different groups. But now you can see on an every weekend where you can hardly move, and particularly through COVID. Now, the two most recent advances, one has been the path link between Addiscombe and Campbell. And Scott, if you could bring up the first slide. Now, I do apologise for my histrionics and elation in that shot, because it's me, but that was 21 years to get that path into operation. In 2000, we were told on the committee that it would be completed later that year. And I could write a book about what's happened in the years that followed, but it is there now, and links the old Manly cycle paths and the Warringah one, but is now part of the greater network. The new separated bike lanes in DY, number 2, please. Again, hugely popular with cyclists, but not necessarily popular with everybody else. I received an email from Jason Falinsky, who is the federal member for, which one is he federal member for? Sorry, forgotten a second. But the local federal member, he wrote saying,
McKellar.
Of course. He wrote to me and he said that the changes would, quote, send businesses bankrupt or force families to sell up because of all the new traffic. So you can't please everybody. Finally, later this month, the new bridge over the north end of the Narrabeen Lagoon is, the construction is starting. It's nearly 2 years late, but finally it's on its way. Now, what I've learned from this lesson is that success does not come easily. And it's partly because of the fragmented nature of cycling. Unlike, say, the netball or football codes, where they have a very strong and keen focus, there are half a dozen or more groups involved in cycling. Next slide, please. There's a serious road cyclists and there's a commuters, and I'll come to them later. The recreational riders who enjoy a coffee, and I fall right into that category. Children riding to school, not as many as there should be, and Scott will talk more about that later. Family groups who want safe and scenic cycling. Shoppers reducing their carbon footprint. And last but not least, because I know we have mountain bike riders here who enjoy the challenges and risks in places like Manly Dam and Bear Park, Belrose. Now, we haven't time to discuss the varying needs of each of these groups, but they do share a number of essential requirements: accessibility, connectivity, wayfaring, appropriate specifications, maintenance, and safety. I've been asked to give council a rating compared to the other areas of Sydney that I've cycled in. I'd probably give it an aspirational B. It's a huge improvement on what used to be the case, where it was personality driven rather than organisational. So Manly had the lead for some time, then it was Warringah, and Pittwater was never interested. One year they had a zero budget for cycling, and when the funds were available for the completion of the Narrabeen Lagoon, Pittwater didn't even put a submission in. So now we have a holistic overview. The 21-22 budget is 5.7 million, which is pretty good. And there'll be other government funding sources available too. It'll be spread across the whole of the beaches. And again, I mentioned the mountain bike riders because funds have been allocated for the Manly Dam upgrade. So I'd say that compared to other councils, we're about average, really. Inferior to, say, Sydney City, but much better than Mossman. I'd like now to suggest ways in which we can all advocate for better cycling infrastructure. Slide, please. Scott, could I have the next slide?
It's there, Norman.
Ah, got it, yeah. Now, this might sound all too easy, but really, every time you go for a ride, look to see what needs to be done. Take a photo, send it to council. It will be actioned. Complaining to your partner or your friends doesn't work. It's surprising how much you can get achieved just by fairly simple things like that. If it's a major thing, then include the councillors who represent that area. They're responsive. I know because I've done it in the past. Make sure you're registered for Have Your Say in the resident feedback process. It's surprising the number of people I speak to who don't realise that they can take part and participate in decision making. And there's been several proposals for bike projects in recent months. Encourage other cyclists, to give their own feedback, so it's not the same people writing again and again. Check the agendas for the Northern Beaches Traffic Committee, which are online, and make submissions if you can see opportunities for traffic changes to incorporate cycling facilities. Again, encourage your cycling circle to do the same. Now, I have a newsletter called Occasional Cycling Notes, where I discuss what I consider to be important cycling issues. And if you want to be included on that list, please let me know. My email address is on screen. Finally, I'll leave you with two specific key issues which I'd like everyone to consider and to advocate for, hopefully. Now, the Manly Spit route is part of a regional route. In fact, it was one of the first routes in the whole of the Northern Beaches with the completion of the Burnt Creek deviation in 1985. But sadly, there's been very little done since that date. And this picture is Manly Lagoon. And there you can see in the foreground, the path has recently been increased to 3.5 metres. And as Sarah pointed out earlier, paths like these should be at least 3 and possibly 3.5 metres, but it ends on a 2-metre path. Now, there is a proposal for that to be 2.5 metres, but it is clearly totally inadequate for the numbers of people who use Manly Lagoon, and you can see the wear either side. So that's something where people can urge their local councillors and council to take further action. Also, the whole of the area, really from Kentbridge Avenue in Seaforth right through to the pool, has been patched. That's all that's happened to it in all those years. There's been no resurfacing. It's got all sorts of poles in the way, both transmission poles and ordinary traffic poles, and desperately needs a complete refit. Now, there's the second issue I'd like to raise is a new proposal by council at Coco Lagoon, and there's a map. Now, this is a terrific proposal. The project has been well thought through and will significantly improve the access to the lagoon and creek. Now, you'll see the orangey line along Abbott Road, which will be a shared path. It terminates in Griffin Street, parallel with the beach, and crosses to the shared path on the other side of the road. Now, in the next photo, or before we go to the next photo, you'll see the red line there in Griffin. Now, the next photo will show you that location. And the shared path ends, as you can see in the foreground with the marking there, and it's a mere 250 metres to widen that path to join with the proposed new one. And you have a complete link on the eastern side of the lagoon. Now, if we go back to the map, you'll see that on the western end, there's another red line which indicates a possible connection to the existing shared path on Harbord Road. And the next photo shows you that people have already decided where that path should be. That's the desire line. It's been heavily used during COVID, and that's in the background, you can see the amenities block, where a very good shared path has been built to connect to the block, but then stopped. So if you go back to the map, you'll see that if those two short areas were actually included in this project, you'd have no fewer than 3 circuits of the lagoon and creek to choose from of an ascending difficulty for families or recreational cyclists. Now, given the huge popularity of the Narrabeen Lagoon, it's absolutely certain that this would be equally popular on the southern end of the peninsula. So I encourage everybody who hasn't made a submission to council on this proposal to do so, and to raise it with their friends, cycling confreres, to get this done right first time. So those are the two issues I think are crucial at present, and if we can get those it will be a win-win in anybody's language. So I leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. They are such great thoughts. And I must admit, I wasn't aware of the Curl Lagoon links and how simple it would be just to create that. Because I mean, we all love Manly. We all love, Narrabeen Lagoon and how successful that is. And also thank you for your list of advocating. And let me assure you that now that we have Scott on the case for Good for Manly, cycling is becoming a fairly major issue for Good for Manly as well. Well done, appreciate that. Some good ideas there. Now, our next speaker is Scott Porter, and he's going to talk to us from a community perspective. Now, many of you may know that Scott is actually standing as a candidate for council for Good for Manly, which is great news, let me tell you, for Good for Manly. So after living and working in a variety of locations in Australia and overseas, Scott and his family settled in the Manly area over 25 years ago. During that time, Scott has been an enthusiastic participant in local community and is a keen road cyclist and long-time competitive mountain biker. So he's got it all covered. So Scott, we're looking forward to hearing about your ideas from a community perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Candy, for that very kind and generous introduction. I'd just like to acknowledge some of the stats and the facts that came through from Sarah's initially, because it's great to see what's happening around the world and the change that's happened, particularly in the last 18 months. And the one thing I picked up on, Sarah and yours, was about helping reduce the number of 2K rides, and there's over 2 million less than 2K rides in Australia. So if we can help reduce that down, I think that's going to have a positive impact on our community. It's a nice catchy number to focus in on. And then on Norman, I'd just like to publicly thank you, Norman, for all the work you've been doing. You haven't been advocating for cycling, for improved safety on cycles just for the last few years. It's 20, maybe even 30 years. I'm not sure exactly the number, but it's been a long time and it's been fantastic. It's great to have people like you who are stepping up and making a difference in the community. So thank you and well done. As Candy mentioned, I am part of the Good for Manly team. I am a local to the Balgala Heights area. My family have grown up in this area. And I started cycling actually with our kids, where we had them on trainer wheels. We'd take them up to Tanya Park and go around Tanya Park Loop a few times. And eventually we got to the point where it wasn't so cool for them to be seen riding with their father. So I had to go find some friends who was interested in riding. And the reality is they quickly introduced me to mountain bike riding, and we started going around Manly Dam, which is amazing and fun. And then before long, we were on to the road bikes and heading up towards West Head, etc. So I'm still doing mountain bike riding and still on the road. I'm probably more road cycling at the moment than mountain bike, if I was being totally honest. So while talking about that, Candy did touch on the cycling umbrella, and the cycling umbrella that Norman also touched on consists of a broad community, and we've had to make a pretty tough decision just to move the mountain biking to one side and focus on cycling. And as you can see, I hope from this discussion so far, there's a lot of depth and breadth actually just within road cycling, forgetting the mountain biking. But we would love to have a conversation and listen and learn from the mountain bikers. And I'd ask you to feel free to make contact either via our Facebook page or our web page, and I'd love to connect with you and learn from you. And if we believe there's potential for us to run a mountain biking session like this one also at some point. And I do have a couple of words on Manly Dam, which I'll cover shortly. So to set the scene, probably around 6 weeks ago, Candy and I made an effort to get out and visit all of the local villages in the Manly ward. So we went off to Fairlight Village, the Rosebery Street area, North Balgala, Seaforth, Balgala Heights. And we actually learned a ton from speaking to the business owners and business operators, and also some of the local community members that happened to be in the area at the time. And not only did we learn a ton, we were given some ideas and suggestions. And it was during this engagement that actually we realized that there's something we can do to help connect the schools with the local community villages. So let me just share my screen and go into a little bit more detail about what I'm talking about here. And this particular example is really around North Balgala. And I'm sure many of you know North Balgala well, the shopping centre precinct area there. And if you've ever driven past there or been close to it after school, the shopping centre area is just heaving with kids on their bikes, families getting together. It's a really good community location. And we had some feedback that potentially the ride between the North Balgala school, which is at the bottom, the North Balgala shops, which is the bottom right-hand side there, and the school up the top left, although it's a nice flat road, it's not a particularly safe ride. I've walked that street and there are a couple of signs around the place, but there's nothing really that delineates it and makes it a safe ride for families and for children. This route actually is designated, I think, as a regional route as part of the Northern Beaches Bike Plan. So it's recognised as a regional route, but it's not treated as one. And we think there is an opportunity for us to really put some of the ideas that Sarah had about how we treat the road treatments. And I suppose just to clarify, I'm not suggesting how we do it in the sense of whether it's a shared bike or a dedicated pathway. I'll leave that to the experts of Sarah and the Northern Beaches Council to work out what the best solution is. But we do believe there's an opportunity to connect the businesses down at the bottom right-hand side there. And as we go up Woodbine Road, where that solid red line is, you've obviously got the Woolgoolga Reserve on the left, the community centre on the right, the Montessori School on the left, and then finally the Balgala Public School on the left, Balgala North Public School on the left. So we're connecting a lot of destination points in a very short space of time. And also at the top, you have Manly Dam, which runs on the north side of Manning Street. And then if you come back to the village for a moment and hang a left and go up Bangaroo, you join Manly Dam again. So again, there's a potential for a nice little circuit there, which is a mixture of Manly Dam and cycleways, but more importantly, bringing the school and the community closer together. So that's a proposal that I've actually shared with the North Balgala P&C and have had some very positive feedback on, and we would love to extend the conversation with them further. And while Candy and I were out and about, as I said, we were also we're at North Balgala, but we're also at Balgala Heights. And we came to the conclusion there's a very similar opportunity, which is to connect the Balgala Heights village with the Balgala Heights Public School. So again, I'll start up the top here, top left, which is where the village and the shops are. And you can see the solid right line coming down New Street, then turning into Lewis, and eventually coming across into the school. Just a point to call out is, again, in the Northern Beaches bike plan, their routing is along Beatrice Street and down Ernest Street. And Beatrice, as I'm sure many of you know, is a very busy street. It's a main thoroughfare down to Clontarf, but also has buses using it up and down. So I suppose our proposal and thinking is that Lewis Street would probably make more sense. Again, how it's done, we'll leave that to the experts. But then when you look at it a bit more holistically, you say, well, if we're going to do that, why don't we extend it a little bit further up into Abbott Street, past the Balgala Bowling Club, which is becoming very popular with families these days. You've got a little left turn into the Barina Tennis Park, continue on Barina Drive to Tanya Park. So we could really have an amazing connector point from Tanya Park to the school and up to the village in a very simple, easy way. So again, I've made contact with the Balgala Heights P&C, and the president there has been very supportive of the idea. And we've also tested both of these two ideas with the council already and have had some positive feedback from the council. So really, it's what's the next steps? And I suppose the way we see it at the moment, the next steps would be for the local community. So whether that's the P&C or a subcommittee to get together, seek a little bit more feedback from a broader base than we have. I mean, our feedback has been, I think, quite thorough, but it'd be good to extend that a little bit further. Come up with a final concept plan, then tap into some of the skills Norman's just taught us about advocacy and advocate further with councillors directly and with council itself directly. We understand that there is a host of grants from New South Wales government and federal government around school safety that potentially the council could tap into. And we'd love to treat both the North Balgala and the Balgala Heights ideas as, I suppose, a test case. And if we can get them up and running, then the next step would be to potentially look at other schools and other villages. So Seaforth springs to mind, Manly West, or Manly Vale as an example. So we've got some opportunity to expand this out further. So really that brings me to an end in that next steps in this area. But Candy, just before I pass back to you, I just wanted to touch on the mountain bike side of things again and just build on what Norman commented on there. Many of you may be aware that the council just recently completed an audit of the Manly Dam mountain bike track. And as a result of that, we know $30,000 has been set aside to help on the design for an upgrade to the mountain bike track, Manly Dam mountain bike track, which is fantastic. And a further $1 million has been put in the budget for next financial year and the following financial year to actually upgrade the Manly Dam mountain bike track. So that's a great win. We also note that the council has put aside $90,000 per year for maintenance of the Manly Dam track, as well as the pedestrian tracks that are there. So as you all know, it's great to build and upgrade, but you want to make sure there's some funding there that's been budgeted for maintenance, and that's happened. So some good wins, I think, in the Manly Dam side of things. And I know there's some conversations around mountain bikes about extending tracks, etc. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that for another day. So on that note, I'm going to pass back to you, Candy. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Scott. And thank you for covering off about the mountain bikes. I know that we've had a question from Paul, who's asking specifically about the mountain bikes. So Paul, can I ask you to get in touch with us on, through our website or to Scott directly? Because as you can see, we are working on that area as well. We just didn't have time to cover it all tonight, and I hope you were happy with those answers that Scott gave us in relation to how much money has been allocated. I just wanted to know that I have personally, working with Hank, who's online, hi Hank, worked very hard to get those upgrades for Manly Dam to start with, and there are other facilities that council's looking at in that space. So we'll follow that on a separate one. Just a couple of quick questions for the panel. Now, Bev, you don't seem too happy about having to wear a helmet. She's raised a couple of questions in relation to helmets. One claiming that it was a money grab when it was first introduced, and the other one asking why should it be mandatory, and whether in fact you know, can we sort of lighten off a little bit and just leave helmets for those who choose to wear them and for racing and mountain biking? I'm just curious. I think probably Norman, you might be a good one to answer this. Why do you think do you think helmets should be mandatory, and if so, why? You just on mute at the moment. You're on mute at the moment, Norman. Thank you.
That one is not an easy one to answer, because I would never go out without a helmet. I certainly understand why people would argue against it, because most of the world doesn't wear a helmet. We in New Zealand are about the only two countries that require helmets. We have draconian penalties for not wearing them, thanks to Duncan Gay.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument is that if you have more people cycling because they just do it on a whim, and they don't, and particularly with bike sharing, where they overseas, you don't need helmets. But in fact, you have more cyclists on the roads, which actually reduces risk. And that's an argument. It's a hard one. There's no question it saves lives and saves injuries. The evidence is clear, but it's not one you can just say yay or nay, because we are very much in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
There's an argument to say that up to age 18, perhaps you must wear a helmet and then allow you to choose thereafter. That's been one proposal. By that time, you've had it ingrained, and most people will continue. But I certainly do not agree with the massive fines that are handed out for people who don't wear helmets on quiet roads.
Okay, great. I think it's probably fair to say that I don't think anybody's been fined for a very long time in Manly, but
that's
it's agreed. And I think also, I know my husband Jeremy's online, and he's had a couple of bike incidents where he believes that his helmet saved his life. So there you go.
Me too.
Yeah, there you go. So thank you for that. Alrighty, a couple of questions in relation to the oceanfront cycle path, and one is from Nikki, who's saying, you know, really shouldn't it be for cycles only, not a shared path here? And also Ian has suggested that better signage for pedestrians should be on that shared path at Manly Beach. Sarah, what's your thoughts? I mean, I would like to see it just for cyclists only, because you're still competing with people trying to deal with the parking meters, etc. Do you think it would work for cycles only, that pathway on Ocean Beach?
I mean, I think it's tricky with the parking there, because people have to access their cars and deal with the meters and unload and get changed for surfing. I mean, the kind of conflict is a result of so much more walking and cycling in Manly, which is only a good thing. So we should celebrate that. Really, where we have to do is look at taking space from the roads, and that's what's beginning to happen in other parts of Sydney now. Is a recognition that we need to prioritise the walkers and the cyclists and find space for them somewhere else so that they can be separated. The shared path model is beginning to fail. It's now not recognised as the best way forward in anywhere where there's high pedestrian activity. So
yeah. Okay, that's a good response. And I must admit, I'm personally, I don't support shared paths. I think it's just a disaster waiting to happen. So I think the more we can do in that area to separate cyclists from pedestrians and people with dogs, the better it will be. Ian's also raised another one, which is the pinch point at the Ferry Bower shared path, and whether that can be widened. I might just say there, Ian, I assume you're talking about just near the surf club there. There is an opportunity for us to do something there, because you may not be aware that Manly Surf Club is to be rebuilt. Again, that was something that Good for Manly initiated. I'm pleased to say that will be happening, and part of the expressions of interest will be to make that area a lot more accessible and a lot easier to manage. So that shouldn't be too far away. So hopefully that can be incorporated as part of the new building for the Manly Surf Club, which should happen in the next year or so. Norman, Sylvia wants to know, can you take a bike on a ferry, train or bus?
You can take it on a ferry. You can't take it on a bus.
Mm-hmm.
You can take it on Sydney trams, but not Newcastle trams for reasons that escape me. And you can take them on trains, but but you have to pay if it's in a commuter time.
Right.
Not that anybody ever does, but
I didn't know that.
legally you're supposed to. So I think the song says 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So yes, you've got the problem is going to be with these new ferries, and you've raised that one, because there's no question that the new ferries will not run as often as the old ferries, and you can be caught at Manly or in the city, and not being able to get back because the buses won't take the bikes. So
that's obviously something we need to keep advocating for.
That's whereas and also there's not enough room on the new ferries for the numbers. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they really get when the schedules are completely in place.
That's a good point, and that's something we should continue to monitor. Ian, thank you for your clarification. He was referring to the pinch point at Three Bower, at the cafe at the Bower, and I think the challenge there is just so many people, isn't it? So that's something that we certainly should put on our list. So thank you for clarifying that. Sarah, this is an interesting one. So Stephen wants to know why no cycle lane has been proposed in the Northern Beaches tunnel. Are there any cycleways in tunnels of that type? And is it possible?
I don't think so. I mean, it's a motorway, and there's so I don't think so. There'd be horrible air quality down there as well. And there are some cycleways proposed as part of the widening of the Wakehurst Parkway, and which is horrible, really. And but there will be a new shared path that's been leveraged as part of that, and I think some others around to replace what's going to be lost around Burnt Creek deviation. So there is some cycling infrastructure involved, but not in the tunnel itself.
Right. Yeah, that's what. So as you say, it's because it's a major motorway, and therefore,
I mean, there are amazing cycle routes along, like the M7 and the M2. So, but not in a tunnel, I don't think.
Not in a tunnel. Okay, well, that's worth knowing. Thank you. Hank also wants to. By the way, Hank is also an activist in his own right, aren't you? So thank you, Hank. Why did the laneway in Manly fail? And that was the one in Darley Road. I can answer that. The main challenge that we had there was that it was, many of you may not be aware, but a lot of the shops along the Corso, they don't have any back laneways, so they don't have any access. And because the Corso is closed to traffic, their deliveries are actually from Darley Road in just 2 or 3 loading zones. So it was discovered that if we took away those loading zones, it was going to be a major issue, that frankly the shops wouldn't be able to get their deliveries. The staff haven't given up on other routes though, and I think Manly absolutely lends itself to more cycle lanes, so that's certainly on the agenda. Julie wants to know the DY Strand closure, which is on trial at the moment. There was a lot of fuss about it initially. Are things settling down, and do you think people are starting to come to terms with it and actually like it? Is it working? Who would like to answer that one? Norman, is that one for you?
Well, every time I've been there, it's been well used. That's just my experience. We actually had, I asked, because of Felinski's claim about the businesses going bankrupt, we actually had a birthday there on Monday night, and every restaurant was packed, including the one we were in. And I asked the manager what she thought of the changes, and she said it meant that her customers had a greater separation from the traffic, that people loved it, and the business had been gangbusters since the opening. Right. The opening of the state, that is, not the opening of the Strand. So it would seem to be a win-win for everybody, for the pedestrians on the widened footpath, and for the cyclists who are now separated, and for diners. So I hope the trial is made permanent.
Yes, very good.
I think there's a bigger project to rework the streets around DY, reduce speeds, make things one way, put in more bike lanes. And really what was happening was that beachfront was being used as a through route. It was being used as a shortcut for people wanting to avoid the main road to get between Cromer, north of DY down to Manly. And that's now being stopped. And once the traffic gets used to it and Google Maps routes you back onto the main road, a lot of the problems have died down. So I think things are settled down.
Yeah, I think it's a good example, isn't it, of trialing something and people getting used to it.
Exactly, it's a huge benefit of a trial. That's that you can reverse it if it really doesn't work.
No,
and that's happened in a few places now.
Okay, so question for Scott from Anonymous: is BMX included in the plan?
We don't currently have something specific around BMX, but I see no reason why we can't include that, and we'd love to extend it out. So again, if you have Anonymous, if you can drop me a note on email or via one of our social media channels, love to have a chat.
Yep, just send it through to Good for Manly. We're everywhere, aren't we, guys?
And there is a consultation out at the moment for a new pump track, skills track type complex up at Belrose.
Yes, that's right.
Anybody who's keen on BMXing and tricks and stuff, please get online and submit your comments.
Yeah, thank you. I think quite a lot of money's been set aside for that one. We might make this our final question comment. This one's from Michelle. Security for parked bikes at Manly Wharf is a big problem, which means people want to take bikes on the ferry to the city. But what can council do to stop people stealing bikes at Manly? Well, I think what we've noticed is they tend to steal the electric bikes. I don't know if you're aware that there actually is a high security place in Whistler Street, in the car park there, which is called Bike Central, and people can hire a spot there. It really is a matter for the police, unfortunately, unless we just consider to have more rangers just keeping an eye on things, because they're busy looking out for dogs and everything else. So I guess the main thing is, all I can say is just get better locks and be mindful that these things happen. Norman, any thoughts on that one? You're probably somebody who would know a bit more about bikes.
I think you've covered it. You've just got to spend the money on locks. There are locks that no one can break. It costs a lot of money, but if you've got an electric bike worth several $1,000s, that's maybe what you have to do. And yes, you're quite right about the Bike Central, because we put it in.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a very small fee. It's not very expensive.
And it's probably not used as much as it should be, because it's very secure.
So that's a good option for you, Michelle, is that Bike Central in Worcester Street car park. It's not, I don't think it's very much. It's like $40 a year or something. And that's a locked, highly secure place where you can safely leave your bikes. Well, guys, what a fantastic night. I mean, as always, we probably could have gone on for a lot longer. I think there's some really good things that have come out of this, and that is that as locals, we're very passionate about cycling. I was interested in the number that 40% of Northern Beaches people ride a bike, which is very high, but not necessarily as a commuter. So there's lots of opportunities there. And we already are starting, I think under amalgamation, we've benefited enormously, Norman. I think your advocacy will be a lot more respected, perhaps, by the Amalgamated Council. And we can see that a lot of missing links have already started to come through. And being one council from the Spit to Palm Beach enables us to do a lot more to have those connections. I've taken on board your suggestions about the Curl Lagoon. I think that has enormous potential. And of course, we're very excited with Scott's ideas with the connections between the local schools and the villages. So let me thank on your behalf Norman Monshall, Sarah Bickford and Scott Porter for your presentations tonight. You've clearly all put a lot of thought and effort into this, and we do appreciate your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And for those of you who are interested in the BMX and the mountain bikes and so on, please get in touch with us, because we would like to do something similar in the future, just to make sure that we're advocating for those as well. All right, everybody, thank you and good night.
Good night.
See you.